Good afternoon, folks. You'll notice a little bit of this business. It's not nerves. It's not nerves. I picked this up from a doctor named Parkinson somewhere. So it's just a nuisance. It doesn't bother me. Don't let it distract you. In December 1958, in an issue of Scientific American devoted to creative thinking in science, F.J. Dyson wrote, "For any speculation which does not at first glance appear crazy, there is no hope." And here's Niels Bohr speaking on behalf of a panel that's evaluating a new paper by Wolfgang Pauli. Dr. Pauli, we are all in agreement that your theory is crazy. The point that divides us is whether it is sufficiently crazy to stand a chance of being right. And I'll add my own contribution to this genre. Just because your idea sounds crazy does not automatically mean it's right. It's a good sign, though. So with that spirit in mind, we begin. Everything is connected. Everything changes. Pay attention. Let's assume, just for the moment, that the entire universe is made of a single omnipresent metasubstance, the ether, a hydrodynamic fluid that manifests just as well as empty space, as protons, as planets, as buildings, as lecture halls, as chairs, tables, humans. And all the time, this ether is rushing down into certain points where it disappears. We call this inrushing phenomena mass. And on the way down, it momentarily creates all mundane phenomena. This is a wild idea to be sure, but is it wild enough to be correct? Who knows? After all, this is just let's suppose. So let's see where this idea leads us. To align our thinking, we examine the etheric context of my hand as I stand here in this flood of ether. Up here, the ether is being air, oxygen, nitrogen, molecules. Here, the ether is being hand, skin, bone, blood. Down here, the ether is air again, and then carpet, and then concrete, and then earth, and so on. And in the process of manifesting all these forms, it is constantly trying to move things out of position, to drag them down. We have to exert constant effort to keep things up. Props are needed to hold the tabletop up off the ground. So we are all affected by the ether flowing down into our local massive body. But that's only part of the story. Everything we call mass is a sync point for ether. And these other nearby sinks have an influence on us as we are on the surface of the earth. What we experience is the vector sum of the effect of each one of these sync points, calculated as though we're acting alone. Looking down on our solar system, we can see the vast inrush into the sun holding everything together. On Earth, we plow through this at an angle that balances our ability to escape with the sun's ability to hold us in perpetual orbital bondage. Now, not only the orbital speed of the Earth must be taken into consideration, but the rotational speed. That's 1,100 miles an hour, added at midnight and subtracted at noon. And the moon. Don't forget the moon. Here's another sync vector that must be taken into consideration. The moon has less impact than the Earth or the sun, but still appreciable. The question arises, how large must the effect be to be noticeable? Noticeable by what? Should the position of the planets be taken into consideration as well? So you see what we've waded off into here? There's a term for this sort of investigation, astrology. But now we must realize that we're no longer talking about some mysterious influence the celestial bodies may have on us, but rather we must confront the fact that these bodies are all in direct mechanical contact with us all the time. Tiny effects, to be sure, but really tiny? Tiny enough at the level of molecules? The DNA molecule, for instance. Who can say with certainty that a little etheric tweak on the DNA early in gestation would not have some possible effect later on? Takeaway point number one, not that I believe that astrology is logical and scientific, but it does seem that there is a direct mechanical way in which we are all literally connected to heavenly bodies all the time. It makes you wonder. Perhaps the ancient shaman knew something that we have forgotten. Everything is connected. Everything changes. Pay attention. So again, regard my hand. Here the ether is being air, here flesh and blood, and here air again. The same chunk of ether, this whole thing rocks. The same chunk of ether. Here air, here flesh, here air again. Now suppose, there's that seductive word, the invitation to adventure and folly and discovery. Let's suppose that down here, where the ether has become air again, there is some residual trace of my hand. The presence of the hand may alter the characteristics of the ether downstream. Now suppose there is another arm in the way of that ether that's coming downstream of my hand. My hand has introduced a change. When the ether gets here, being this other arm, it carries with it possibly some residual trace of what was in my hand. Takeaway point number two. I don't for a moment want to say that healing by laying on of hands is logical and scientific, but it does seem that there is a direct connection here, a channel, whereby one hand may affect another body. So the matter cannot be ruled impossible a priori. Everything is connected. Everything changes. Pay attention. Now take a deep breath and we will look at interconnectedness from an entirely different level. Again, we have pointed out that in our omnipresent etheric worldview, the same patch of ether momentarily manifests as whatever lies in its path. If we expand our view, step back to a more distant perspective, we see all the mundane objects of our world, including ourselves, formed of, held in the grip of, this endless etheric flood. Think for a moment about this. Think what is happening moment by moment. From the viewpoint of the ether, this room, these chairs, these people, etc., is all just a transient show. What it was earlier will be, then flashing instantaneously through now, and right on into was. Think what this means. What will be is already present. Then it does is, then moves right on into was. But it doesn't go away. Here's the same idea stated another way. For any event to take place, all the necessary antecedents for that event converge as now, the event. And downstream of now, all the event consequences pick up the flow. But now doesn't have to be regarded as a discontinuity. It's just one cross-section of the flow. Let's try one more cut at this. Any physical object is a transient phenomena, created moment by moment in the ether stream. This process is not perfect. In the process of this manifestation, the ether is constantly bringing about change in the physical object being manifest. Aging, we call this. Aging takes place everywhere, all the time. Whatever all the antecedents are leading to reality, they perpetually age into the next moment of reality, the next now. The seed gradually becomes the plant. The earth rotates. Hair grows. All in the grip of, all through the agency of the ever-present, the implacable process of etheric flow. Everything is connected. Everything changes. Pay attention. That concludes the speech.
Well, we have plenty of time for questions. Thank you, Jerry.
Hi.
Any questions?
Got one.
I see a lot of coincidence between your principle of the ether and the principle of oneness in Eastern religions and even some Christian mysticism.
You know, I understand the problem people have hearing from up here. It's a blurry sound that comes through.
I'll speak more deeply. So I see a lot of coincidence between the principle of oneness in Eastern religions and the principle of ether as you speak about it. My question for you is, as you conceive of it, is ether a substance that has something behind it, or is it in itself something that connects everything and is not dependent upon anything?
I use the term meta-substance when I refer to it, and by meaning a higher realm of substance. It is that from which everything else is formed. And aside from the ether, there is nothing else.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Would then you say, philosophically, you'd have to then posit a beginning for the ether as well?
I didn't quite understand the question. Philosophically, what?
You would have to posit a beginning for the ether as well?
That's a long question. There's neoetherics.com. I started writing on this subject about 45 years ago. And I've been singing the same song over and over ever since. I only know one song. But you'll find the back-up discussion of how I got to this point by reading neoetherics.com.
I'm glad that you led off with an anecdote from the early career of Wolfgang Pauli, because this entire talk puts me very much in mind of a quote from Pauli himself much later in his career nicht einmal falsch. The loose translation into English would be not even wrong.
Jerry?
Yeah, it's interesting with regard to the ether. The Michelson Morley experiments a long time ago in the late 1800s said, that's not real. But what's unknown is that I think it was in the 60s or 80s in Nature, the Air Force, in fact, had done some studies that did the same experiments with better instrumentation that says the ether is real. So it's just something that is, and there's references to that, and I just thought that'd be interesting thing that's there. And ether, I believe the things you're saying, that everything is in fact made from the ether, and the vortexes that form from that is what creates things. So
I thank you for bringing up Michelson Morley. There's a widely distributed misunderstanding about what Michelson Morley proved. They did not prove the absence of the ether. They proved that if there is an ether flow relative to the surface of the Earth, quote, it is probably less than 1/6 of, and almost certainly less than 1/4 of, the orbital speed of the Earth in its cycle. So that's not a null result. That's a statement of the limitation of their instrumentation. Another Michelson Morley Dayton Miller, did dozens and dozens of experiments on this, and his result essentially agreed with Michelson Morley, and he discovered a 10 kilometer per second ether drift, which is pretty much the agreement now. Go ahead.
The concept of the ether that really resonates best with me is David Bohm's hollow movement. It brings the concept of everything changing, but it's just something that very resonates with me, and I wondered what you think of that.
I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but as I was listening to yesterday's talk, there was a discussion about the effect that laying on of hands had on certain molecules. I forget the whole detail, but it had to do with the proximity of the healer's hands affecting. And I'm listening to this and I'm saying, well, yeah, I can see how there's a channel there, how there could be a connection between a healer's hands and what's downstream.
Well, it's like a hologram, where everything is everywhere all the time.
That's true.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jerry. If I could get everyone back at 2:05 following the lunch. Thank you.